She had spent 3 years learning how to disappear quietly. 3 years swallowing her pride, rebuilding her bank account, and teaching herself that a man who walks out in silence was not worth the noise of chasing. But the night Elena Whitmore walked into that restaurant and came face to face with the man who had discarded her, standing there polished and untouchable beside his new fiancée, every wall she had so carefully constructed began to crack. And then a stranger in a dark suit put his hand on her back and kissed her in front of everyone. What happened next would change both their lives forever. If this kind of story grips you, raw, unexpected, and absolutely unforgiving, then subscribe to this channel right now and follow every part until the end, because this is only the beginning. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. The reservation had been Marisol's idea. Elena had known that from the beginning, known it the way you know a storm is coming before the sky actually changes color. Something in the pressure of the air, something in the way her cousin's voice had climbed half an octave too high on the phone when she mentioned the restaurant's name, Cielo, 43rd floor. The kind of place that didn't list prices on the menu because if you needed to ask, you had already answered your own question about whether you belonged there. "It's just dinner," Marisol had said. "Thomas's family, my family, a few close friends, nothing formal." Elena had believed her. That was her first mistake. She stood now at the entrance of Cielo in a dress she had bought 2 years ago for a work function she never ended up attending. Navy blue, fitted at the waist, nothing wrong with it except that it was exactly the kind of dress a woman wore when she was trying to look like she belonged somewhere without trying too hard to prove it. The maitre d' gave her the particular smile reserved for guests who arrived alone and slightly underdressed. He checked the list, found her name, and led her through a dining room that hummed with the muted, expensive sound of people who had never once worried about a utility bill. Marisol was already at the table. She looked radiant, genuinely, annoyingly radiant in a way that only happened to women who were deeply in love and not yet disappointed by it. She rose when she saw Elena and held both her hands and said something warm that Elena didn't fully hear because her eyes had already moved, involuntarily, the way a tongue finds a broken tooth, to the far end of the room. Marcus Vale was standing near the bar. He was laughing at something. His head was tilted back slightly, the way it always tilted when he wanted people to notice that he was the kind of man worth looking at. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, and beside him stood a woman Elena had seen only in photographs. Cassandra Price, 34 years old, heir to the Price Holdings real estate empire, and the reason Marcus had stopped returning Elena's calls exactly 1,012 days ago. Elena had stopped counting at day 300. The number had simply stayed with her the way certain things do, stubborn and unwanted. She felt Marisol's grip tighten on her fingers. "I didn't know he was going to be here," Marisol said, and the guilt in her voice was so raw and immediate that Elena believed her without question. "Thomas and Marcus went to the same prep school. I didn't think—" "Elena, I swear I can get Thomas to ask him to leave." "Don't." Elena heard herself say it before she had decided to. "Don't do that. It's your engagement dinner." "That doesn't matter. It matters to me." She exhaled slowly through her nose. "I'm fine." She was not fine. She sat down. She unfolded her napkin. She ordered sparkling water from a passing server and picked up the menu and stared at the words printed on the thick cream cardstock without reading a single one of them. Across the table, Marisol's future mother-in-law was describing the venue they'd selected for the wedding, and around her, Thomas's friends and their wives and girlfriends engaged in the careful, practiced conversation of people who had known each other too long to be genuinely interested in anything the other said. Elena nodded when nodded at. She smiled when smiled at. She was very, very good at the performance of being present, when every nerve in her body was focused on the man 20 feet away who had not yet looked in her direction. He looked in her direction 20 minutes later. She felt it before she saw it, a shift in the air, a change in peripheral weight. When she turned her head, Marcus was already looking at her, and his expression moved through several things very quickly. Surprise, then calculation. Then something she recognized as social performance settling over his face like a mask being fitted. He came over. Of course he came over. Elena. His voice was exactly as she remembered it, warm in the way of things that were warm without being hot, pleasant, frictionless, designed to move through a room without catching on anything. He bent slightly and kissed her cheek, and she smelled the same cologne and felt nothing except a low, steady pulse of anger, so well managed it almost felt like calm. "I didn't realize you'd be here tonight." "Marisol's my cousin," Elena said. Right, right. He smiled. It reached his eyes just enough to be convincing. "You look well." She looked at him and said nothing. He turned slightly, creating the natural opening, and Cassandra materialized at his side with the smooth efficiency of a woman who had spent years attending to her position in a room. Up close, she was precisely as beautiful as her photograph suggested, fine-boned, impeccably maintained, with the particular kind of confidence that came not from accomplishment, but from never having been forced to question her own value by material circumstance. "Cassie, this is Elena Whitmore. Elena and I were together for a while years ago." He paused just long enough. "Elena is a receptionist somewhere downtown, I think. Thomas, wasn't your father's firm looking for someone for the front desk?" The silence lasted 1 second. It was a very long second. Elena heard it the way you hear a small bone break, a sound too clean and too specific to be anything else. Around the table, Thomas's mother had stopped mid-sentence. Marisol's face had gone the particular still of someone trying very hard not to react visibly. 2 of Thomas's friends had looked up from their phones. Cassandra offered a smile that was genuinely pleasant because she had no reason to be cruel. She had already won. "Oh, that's sweet. It's nice that you've stayed connected." Elena set down her water glass. "The thing about 3 years was that they changed you whether you consented to the change or not." At 31, Elena Whitmore had spent those years working full-time as a paralegal at Hendricks & Cole, one of the 3 most respected litigation firms in the city. She had spent those years studying for the bar exam with textbooks propped open on the kitchen counter while she ate standing up because sitting down felt like stopping. She had spent those years becoming someone she could actually respect, and she had done it alone, without assistance, without inheritance, without anyone in a charcoal suit noticing that she existed. She had also spent those years learning when to speak and when to let silence do the work. She let it do the work now. She looked at Marcus with the steadiness of a woman who has made peace with a thing and said very quietly, "I'm a paralegal, Marcus. I've been studying for the bar, but you always had trouble keeping track of the details that didn't involve you." Something moved across his face. It was there for less than a breath and then gone. "Of course," he said smoothly. "I misremembered." He steered Cassandra back toward the bar. Elena picked up her water and drank it, and did not allow her hand to shake even slightly. Marisol reached across the table and put her hand over Elena's wrist, and Elena shook her head once, small and tight, meaning not now, meaning I'm holding this together, meaning please don't make me feel it yet, because if I feel it now, I won't be able to stop. The dinner proceeded. Courses arrived and were eaten and taken away. Wine was poured. Thomas gave a brief, charming speech about Marisol that made several of the women at the table press their fingertips to the corners of their eyes, and Elena watched her cousin receive the uncomplicated happiness of being loved in public, and felt something that was not quite envy and not quite grief, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. She was reaching for her water glass again when the door opened. She noticed it because the room noticed it first. One of those collective shifts in attention that happens without announcement, a slight gravitational pull toward an entrance. The maitre d', who had been professionally indifferent to every other arrival that evening, straightened perceptibly. A server paused mid-stride. At the bar, Marcus turned his head. The man who walked in was not the tallest person in the room. He was not performing for the room. He moved through it the way water moves around stone, with the calm certainty of something that is never needed to announce its direction. He was perhaps 38, dark-haired, wearing a suit so dark it absorbed the ambient light of the chandeliers rather than reflecting it. He had a face that was striking in the way of things built for function rather than beauty. Sharp jaw, careful eyes that moved across the room once and filed everything they found. He was accompanied by 2 men who positioned themselves without obvious instruction near the entrance and stayed there. Elena registered all of this in the peripheral, automatic way you registered weather, information processed without decision. She had already looked back down at the centerpiece, a dense arrangement of white flowers she had been staring at without seeing for the past hour, when she heard the footsteps stop behind her chair. She did not turn immediately. When she did, the man was closer than she had expected, close enough that she had to tilt her chin slightly to look at his face. Up close, his eyes were a color that defied easy categorization. Not quite gray, not quite green, carrying the quality of deep water in winter. He was looking at her with an expression she could not read, and for one disorienting moment she had the sensation that he had not just walked in from the entrance, but had been waiting somewhere specific for a very specific amount of time. He placed his right hand against the back of her chair, not touching her, not quite, but present in a way that the hand of a stranger had no right to be. And he said, in a voice pitched low enough that it traveled no farther than the two of them, "There you are. I was starting to think you'd left without me." Elena stared at him. She had never seen this man before in her life. She opened her mouth and he met her eyes, and something in his expression, not a wink, not a signal, something smaller and more serious than either, said, "Wait. Just wait." And Elena Whitmore, who was a woman of sharp instincts and documented self-preservation, did the thing she had not done once in the last 3 years. She trusted a stranger. "Sorry," she heard herself say. "I got caught up talking." She had no idea why she said it. Later, she would spend a considerable amount of time examining that moment, trying to locate the exact mechanism by which a woman who had rebuilt herself on the principle of absolute self-reliance found herself walking off a cliff on the word of a man she had never met. The closest she could come was this. He had looked at her without pity and without agenda, and in that room, at that moment, it was the rarest thing she had ever been offered. He pulled out the empty chair beside her, Marisol's cousin's husband's seat, vacated when the man had excused himself to make a phone call, and sat down with the ease of someone taking a position they had already decided was theirs. Around the table, the ambient conversation had not stopped, but it had changed pitch slightly, the way a room sounds different when everyone in it is paying attention to one thing while pretending to pay attention to another. Marisol was staring at Elena with an expression that moved through several phases of bewilderment. Elena leaned very slightly toward the man and said, from the corner of her mouth, barely moving her lips, "I don't know who you are." "Dominic Hale," he said, equally quiet. He picked up the empty wine glass in front of him with a familiar ease and did not drink from it. "I came in for a meeting that got moved. I saw what happened." The receptionist's comment. Elena absorbed this. "You sat down at a stranger's engagement dinner because a man said something rude to me." "I sat down because you didn't flinch," he said. "Most people flinch." She looked at him. His profile was very still, directed at some neutral point across the table, and he spoke without turning toward her, which gave the whole exchange the quality of a conversation happening in a dream, intimate and entirely deniable. "That's not a reason," she said. "I know." Across the room, Marcus Vale had gone quiet in a way that Marcus Vale was not accustomed to being quiet. Elena didn't look at him directly, but she was aware of him the way you are aware of a weather system, through its effects on everything around it. Thomas's friends had repositioned slightly. Cassandra was saying something to Marcus in a low, controlled voice, and Marcus was nodding, but his eyes were aimed at Elena's table with an expression she had seen on his face only once before, 3 years ago, when a junior colleague at his firm had been promoted above him. The particular consuming look of a man who believed something belonged to him that was no longer behaving like it did. The server arrived and asked Dominic for his order with a deference so pronounced it was almost physical, and Dominic ordered sparkling water in the tone of a man who expected it to appear without further conversation, which it did. "You should know," Elena said, very quietly, "that whatever you think you're doing, it's not going to change anything. He'll just assume I paid someone." Dominic turned and looked at her then, for the first time directly, and something in his expression shifted. Not amusement exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that sat behind the careful composure like a light behind a wall. "Nobody pays me, Ms. Whitmore." She felt the hair on her forearms rise slightly beneath the fabric of her dress. "You know my name." "Marisol said it when you arrived. I was near the entrance." Elena studied his face for deception, and found the expression of a man who was very good at being looked at and revealed nothing he didn't choose to reveal. She had spent 3 years in a law firm learning to read people's faces for the gap between what they were saying and what they were holding back, and this man's face offered her the particular frustration of a document with the critical pages missing. She looked back at the centerpiece. "This is going to make things worse," she said. "Probably," he agreed. Marcus came over 4 minutes later. She didn't time it, but she felt the approach and the change of pressure at the edge of the table, and when she looked up, Marcus was standing there with Cassandra slightly behind him and a smile on his face that she recognized as the social equivalent of a held blade, pleasant-looking, designed to cut. "Dominic," Marcus said. Not a greeting. A test. Dominic looked at him with the specific quality of a man who found nothing in front of him requiring particular attention. "Marcus," he said. The single word landed like a period at the end of a sentence that had already been decided. The color changed in Marcus's face, very slightly, very quickly. "I wasn't aware you knew, Elena," Marcus said. "There are a number of things you're not aware of," Dominic said pleasantly. Cassandra's hand found Marcus's arm. Thomas's mother had stopped pretending to have a separate conversation entirely. Marisol was gripping her champagne flute with both hands. Marcus looked at Elena, and what lived in his eyes in that moment was not anger. Anger would have been manageable, almost respectful in its directness. What lived there was something smaller and uglier, the recalculation of a man reassigning value to something he had thrown away because someone more powerful than him had picked it up. Elena looked back at him and felt nothing she hadn't already felt. The window for him to hurt her had opened and closed years ago. What she felt now, sitting very straight in her navy dress with a dangerous stranger beside her, was something closer to exhaustion than triumph. The particular tiredness of being fought over without being consulted. She stood up. Both men looked at her. "Excuse me," she said. To Marisol, "I'll be right back." To the table in general, the smile she had been calibrating all evening, pleasant and unreadable and worth nothing. She set her napkin down and walked toward the corridor that led to the restrooms and did not look at either of the men she left standing behind her. The corridor was cool and quiet after the ambient pressure of the dining room. Elena stood against the wall beside a framed black and white photograph of some city she didn't recognize and breathed. In through the nose, 4 counts. Out through the mouth, 4 counts. The technique she had learned from a self-help podcast she would never have admitted to listening to, which she had listened to approximately 200 times in the first year after Marcus left. The footsteps behind her were not Marcus's. She knew before she turned. Dominic Hale stood at the entrance to the corridor, hands in his pockets, not advancing, simply present. He looked at her the way a person looks at something they are trying to understand rather than acquire, and Elena had been looked at enough different ways in her life to know the difference. "What do you actually want?" she said. Not hostile. Genuinely asking. He considered the question seriously, which she hadn't expected. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's the honest answer." She studied him. "People know who you are," she said. "In there. I could see it." He didn't confirm or deny. He waited. "Who are you?" she asked. The look on his face changed. Not a softening, exactly, but a settling, like something that had been braced, releasing tension by a fraction of a degree. He said it simply, without arrangement, the way a man states a fact he has long since made peace with. "The kind of man your cousin's dinner guests will be talking about tomorrow." Elena held his gaze for a long moment. Outside, through the walls, she could feel the low thrum of the dining room, and somewhere in it Marcus Vale standing with his recalculated expression and his perfect fiancée. "I need to go back in," she said. "I know." "And when I do," she said carefully, "you're going to need to explain to me why you actually sat down at that table." He looked at her with those unreadable winter water eyes and said, "I will." They returned to the dining room together, and the room, which had been waiting, as rooms do, for whatever would happen next, registered their entrance simultaneously, and Elena felt 40 pairs of eyes move across her like a wave. and she walked back to her seat with her spine straight and her jaw set and her mind running very fast on the question she had not yet asked aloud. Who exactly was Dominic Hale, and why did a room full of powerful people hold its breath when he walked through the door? She sat down. She picked up her water glass, and then Marisol leaned across the table and whispered 3 words that answered one question while opening something vast and terrifying beneath her feet. Elena. That's him. Elena. That's him. Marisol's whisper was barely audible above the ambient murmur of the dining room, but it landed with the specific weight of something dropped from a height. Elena set her water glass down without drinking from it. That's who, she said, keeping her voice flat, keeping her eyes on the centerpiece. Marisol leaned closer. Her perfume was gardenia and something warmer underneath, and her voice had dropped to the register people used when they were afraid of being overheard by the wrong person. Dominic Hale. Elena, that's Dominic Hale. The Hale family. You don't know that name? Elena knew the name. Everyone in this city knew the name, the way everyone knew the name of a river that had flooded once and taken things with it that couldn't be recovered. The Hale family had been operating in the city's financial and criminal architecture for 40 years. Real estate holdings that were legitimate on paper and considerably less legitimate in the structures beneath the paper. Contracts that were honored not because of courts, but because of what happened to people who broke them. She had processed enough criminal defense paperwork at Hendricks and Cole to understand what the name represented. She had read enough deposition transcripts to know that the men who appeared in them, men who had direct dealings with the Hale organization, spoke with the careful, rehearsed restraint of people testifying about something they very much wanted to still be alive to have forgotten. Dominic Hale was not just a powerful man. He was the kind of powerful that didn't need a room to know it was there. Elena looked at him across the table. He was speaking quietly to one of Thomas's colleagues. Something low, something that made the colleague nod with the slightly too rapid agreement of someone who wanted the conversation to end without incident. His profile was composed. His hands rested on the table without tension. He looked from the outside like a man at a dinner party, and the only tells, the ones Elena's 3 years of paralegal work had trained her to find, were the small, constant quality of his attention, the way his eyes never fully committed to any one point in the room, but kept a soft peripheral track on every exit, every entrance, every shift in the arrangement of bodies around him. He was always watching. He just didn't look like it. How do you know who he is? Elena asked Marisol, still not looking away from him. Thomas told me, before we came in tonight. Marisol's hand found Elena's knee under the tablecloth. He said if Dominic Hale ever came in while we were here, we don't make it an issue. We don't stare. We don't involve ourselves. And yet here we are, Elena said, thoroughly involved. Marisol's grip tightened. What did he say to you in the corridor? Nothing useful. Elena, he said he doesn't know what he wants yet. She finally turned and looked at her cousin directly. Which is either the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 3 years or the most dangerous. Marisol looked at her with the expression of a woman watching someone she loved make a decision that couldn't be undone. Those might be the same thing, she said. They were interrupted by the return of Thomas's cousin from his phone call, who reclaimed his seat with the mild confusion of a man who had left a chair and returned to find the geography of the room fundamentally altered. Dominic shifted without comment to the adjacent seat that had been empty all evening, the one closest to the wall, the one with the clear sightline to the entrance. Elena noticed the choice. She suspected everything Dominic Hale did was a choice, and none of it was accidental. Dessert arrived. Elena ate without tasting anything. Across the room, Marcus had repositioned himself at a small table near the bar with Cassandra and 2 other couples, people Elena didn't recognize, people who had the polished, brand-new quality of friends acquired through money rather than history. He was talking too much. She could see it in the movement of his hands, the angle of his body, the way he kept orienting slightly toward Elena's table and then correcting, the self-conscious performance of a man who needed an audience to confirm that he was fine. He was not fine. She recognized the specific quality of his unease because she had spent 2 years studying it from the inside, learning the difference between Marcus genuinely at ease and Marcus performing ease, and the 2 things looked nothing alike once you knew what to look for. The jaw was too set. The laugh came a half-second too late after the setup. He was rattled. She should have felt something about that. She searched for it and found only the low, steady exhaustion of a woman who had been performing composure for 3 hours and was running low on the resources required to maintain it. The dinner wound down the way expensive dinners do, gradually, in stages, with the particular reluctance of people who have nowhere more important to be but can't quite commit to leaving somewhere they're comfortable. Thomas's mother gave a brief speech. Champagne was poured. Marisol cried very slightly and beautifully, the way women cried when they were genuinely happy and slightly overwhelmed, and Thomas put his arm around her with the ease of a man who had done it 10,000 times already and intended to do it 10,000 more. Elena raised her glass. She was aware of Dominic beside her, not looking at her, not performing any particular attention to her, and yet present in a way that registered in her peripheral nervous system as a low, continuous hum, like standing near something that generates its own electromagnetic field. When the party began to break up, she excused herself to find her coat. The coat check was down a short hallway near the elevator bank, staffed by a young man who retrieved her wrap with efficient disinterest. She was pulling it around her shoulders when she heard the footsteps and turned to find not Dominic, but Marcus, standing 6 feet away with his coat already on, and Cassandra noticeably absent. He looked like a man who had been rehearsing something. "Can we talk?" he said. "We just spent 3 hours in the same room," Elena said. "We've talked enough." "That's not what I—" He stopped. Reset. His jaw worked for a moment. "Who is he, Elena?" She looked at him. "You know who he is." "I know the name. I don't know why he's sitting at your table acting like you're—" He stopped again. His nostrils flared slightly. "How long have you known him?" "That's not a question you get to ask me." "I'm asking it." "Marcus." She said his name the way you'd say the name of a wrong turn you'd already made and couldn't unmake. "You introduced me to your fiancé tonight. You called me a receptionist in front of a table full of people. Whatever you lost the right to ask me, you lost it a long time before tonight." He moved closer. Not aggressive. Marcus had never been physically aggressive. It wasn't his particular style of damage. He moved the way he always moved when he wanted something, with the specific calibrated proximity of a man who believed his presence was inherently persuasive. "I made a mistake," he said, with the comment, "I know that." "You made a mistake," she repeated. "It came out wrong. It came out exactly as intended, and you know that." His face did something complicated. "You've changed," he said, and she couldn't tell whether he meant it as a compliment or a complaint, and she suspected he couldn't either. "Yes," she said, "I have. The man at the table, Shayum, is none of your business." "He's dangerous, Elena." His voice dropped. It had the quality of genuine concern layered over something else, something she spent a moment identifying and then recognized as territorial. He wasn't worried about her. He was worried about what it meant that someone like Dominic Hale had publicly attached himself to a woman Marcus had publicly dismissed. "Whatever you think he is, whatever he told you." "He didn't tell me anything," she said. "That's actually the first thing about him that impressed me." She walked past him. He said her name once more. She didn't stop. Outside, the city was doing what it always did in late October, conducting itself with the brisk, indifferent energy of a place that had too much momentum to pause for anyone's emotional state. The air was sharp and cold and tasted like exhaust and distant rain, and Elena stood on the sidewalk pulling her wrap tighter and thinking about nothing specific and everything general and feeling, more than anything, very tired. "He followed you out." Dominic was standing 3 feet to her left. She hadn't heard him come through the door. "I know," she said. "He's watching from the window." She didn't turn to check. "I know that too." A silence. The kind that wasn't uncomfortable, which itself made her uncomfortable. She was not accustomed to silences with strangers that didn't require filling. "I should go home," she said. "I'll have someone take you." "I don't need—" "It's not about need." He said it without heat, without insistence, simply as a statement of how things were. "It's late and you're alone, and he's watching from the window, and he knows where you parked if you drove here." She turned and looked at him then, full on, in the cold light of the street. His face was exactly as unreadable as it had been inside. The carefully cultivated composure of a man who had learned early that showing his hand was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Why do you care?" she said. "And I want the real answer this time. Not the I don't know yet." He looked at her for a long moment. A cab moved through the street behind him, its light painting a brief amber line across his face and disappearing. "Because nobody in that room said anything," he said. 40 people watched him do that, and nobody said a word, and you didn't flinch. You just absorbed it, like you'd learned how to take hits and keep moving, and you'd gotten so good at it you didn't even notice you were bleeding. Elena's jaw tightened. "I'm not bleeding," she said. "I know," he said. "That's what I'm talking about." She stared at him. The city moved around them, indifferent and continuous, and somewhere above them in the 43rd floor restaurant, Marcus Vale was watching from a window and calculating. "One car," she said. "That's all." He nodded once and took out his phone. The car arrived in 4 minutes. Not a cab, not a car service with an app logo on the window, but a dark sedan driven by a man who held the door without being asked, and closed it without being thanked, and drove without being given directions, which meant Dominic had told him already, which meant Dominic had known where she lived before she agreed to the car, and she filed that fact somewhere in the careful architecture of things she was not yet ready to fully examine. She sat in the back seat alone. Dominic did not get in. He leaned down to the open window and looked at her with those unclassifiable eyes and said, "I'd like to see you tomorrow." "That's not a question," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." She looked at him for what felt like a very long time and was probably 4 seconds. "I have work until 6. "I know where Hendricks and Cole is," he said. The window went up. The car pulled away from the curb. Elena looked straight ahead and breathed and did not look back. She was home by 11:15. Her apartment was on the 7th floor of a building that was clean and well-maintained and entirely without character, the kind of apartment a person lived in when their real life was happening somewhere outside of it. Law books on the kitchen table, case files stacked on the second chair, a coffee maker that ran on a timer because she was reliably out the door by 7. She changed out of the navy dress and hung it carefully, and stood in her kitchen in a t-shirt and track pants and drank a glass of water and tried to organize what had happened into something she could reason about. She got about as far as the moment Dominic's hand had touched the back of her chair and stopped. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She opened the message. It read, "You didn't say goodnight." She stared at it for a moment, typed, "How did you get this number?" The response came in under 10 seconds. "Good question." She put the phone face down on the counter and went to bed and did not sleep for a considerable amount of time. The next morning arrived the way mornings did when you hadn't slept well. Too bright, too early, with the particular cruelty of a world that had kept moving while you lay awake trying to make sense of it. Elena was at her desk at Hendricks and Cole by 7:45, coffee in hand, the Morrow deposition files open in front of her, doing what she always did when she needed to stop thinking about something, burying herself in work that required complete attention. It worked for approximately 2 hours. At 10 o'clock, her colleague Daniel Marsh dropped a folder on the edge of her desk and said, "Your name is trending." She looked up. Daniel was 26, third-year paralegal, with the perpetually amused expression of a man who found human drama entertaining rather than exhausting. He dropped into the chair across from her and opened his phone and turned it toward her. The photograph was from last night, taken inside Cielo, presumably by someone at an adjacent table, posted to what appeared to be a social media account dedicated to sightings of notable figures in the city. It showed Dominic Hale seated at a dinner table in profile, leaning slightly toward a woman in a navy dress whose face was partially visible. The caption read, "D. Hale at Cielo last night." New company? The post had been shared 412 times since midnight. Elena kept her face very still. "Delete the app," she said. "Are you kidding me right now?" Daniel said. "Elena, that's Dominic Hale." "I'm aware." "He's sitting at your table." "He sat at the table. It was a shared space." Daniel stared at her. "You know who that is, right?" "Daniel, the Morrow deposition." "The Morrow deposition can wait 5 seconds while you explain to me why one of the most—" "Daniel." He recognized the tone. Everyone at Hendricks and Cole eventually learned Elena Whitmore's tones. She had a full register of them, and this one, flat and final, meant the conversation was over before it started. He took his phone back and stood up and said, as he walked away, "I'm just saying, that's not nothing." And she did not dignify it with a response. She worked. She processed case notes. She cross-referenced statutory citations. She ate a sandwich at her desk at noon without tasting it, and drank 3 cups of coffee and did not check her phone again until 2 in the afternoon when it buzzed with a number she now recognized. "Marcus called my office this morning." She read it twice. Then typed, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you should know what he's doing." "What did he say?" The response took longer this time, 40 seconds. She watched the screen. "He wanted to know how long we'd been together. He was fishing for information. My assistant told him I was unavailable. And I want to know if you want me to call him back." Elena set the phone down on her desk and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The fluorescent light above her hummed its single, tireless note. She picked the phone back up. "No," she typed. "Don't call him back." "All right." Then, after a pause, 6 o'clock, Whitmore, I'll be outside." She put the phone in her desk drawer and closed it, and went back to the Morrow deposition, and did not think about Dominic Hale for the remainder of the afternoon, except for the 17 times she did. He was outside at 6 o'clock exactly. Not in the car. Standing on the sidewalk with his hands in his coat pockets, without the 2 men from the night before, looking entirely unremarkable in the way that only people who had never needed to try to look remarkable could pull off. The late afternoon light hit the street at an angle that made everything look more significant than it was, and Elena pushed through the glass door of Hendricks and Cole with her bag over one shoulder and her coat not yet buttoned, and saw him and stopped. He looked at her. She finished buttoning her coat. "You're on time," she said. "I'm always on time," he said. It wasn't a boast, just another fact. They walked. Not toward a car, not toward a specific destination that had been announced. Just walked, because the evening was cold enough to feel real, and the sidewalk was crowded enough to be anonymous. Elena found, somewhat to her own surprise, that this was easier than sitting across from him at a table. Motion helped. Motion gave you somewhere to direct your eyes that wasn't the other person's face. "Marcus called your office," she said. "He did." "That means he's trying to figure out if this is real." "That's one interpretation." "What's the other one?" Dominic glanced at her sideways. "That he's trying to figure out how to use it." She absorbed this. "Use it how?" "Marcus Vale's fiancée's family has holdings in 3 of my family's properties. Commercial leases, price holdings." He said it the way he said everything, without emphasis, without theater, just the fact and the air around it. He may have realized that publicly trying to undermine someone connected to me creates a liability for his future in-laws. Elena stopped walking. Dominic stopped 2 steps later and turned back to look at her. "You knew that," she said. "Last night, when you sat down. You knew who Marcus was." Something moved across his face. "I knew the price connection. I didn't know you." "But you knew he was connected to your family's business." "Yes." She looked at him standing there on the sidewalk with the evening commute moving around him in both directions and felt the specific cold clarity that came when a thing you had been hoping was one thing revealed itself to be another. "So this wasn't random," she said. "You didn't just walk in and see a woman being embarrassed and decide to help." "It wasn't that simple," he said. "And it wasn't calculated either. It was somewhere between the two." "That's not good enough." "I know." "Tell me the rest of it." He looked at her for a long moment. A gust of wind moved through the street and Elena held his gaze and did not look away. "I go to Cielo twice a month," he said. "I have an arrangement with the owner. Last night I came in and I saw Marcus Vale at the bar, and I recognized him through the price connection, and I thought nothing of it, and then I watched him walk to your table and I watched what he did, and—" He stopped. His jaw set slightly. "And I've seen that kind of thing before. The specific kind of thing where someone uses a public room to remind another person of their place. I've seen it done to people I was responsible for, and I didn't stop it because it wasn't the right moment to make it an issue, and I sat with that for a long time." His eyes stayed on hers. "Last night, I had the option to make it an issue, So I did. The city moved around them. Elena stood very still. That's still not entirely clean, she said. No, he said. It's not. Nothing I do is entirely clean. You should know that now if you're going to know it at all. She held his gaze for 3 more seconds and then turned and started walking again, and he fell into step beside her without being invited, which she was beginning to understand was simply how he moved through the world. Without asking, without hesitating, but also without taking more than what the moment actually offered. They ended up at a coffee shop 12 blocks from her office, the kind with exposed brick and mismatched chairs, and a menu written in chalk that had been up long enough that the edges of the letters were blurred with time. It was almost entirely empty. Elena took a corner table without discussing it, and Dominic sat across from her and ordered black coffee, and she ordered the same thing, and for a few minutes neither of them spoke. Then she said, I'm a paralegal. I've been studying for the bar for 2 years. I work 60 hours a week, and I haven't taken a vacation since 2021, and my name is going to be on a law license before I'm 33. That's who Marcus called a receptionist. Dominic looked at her. I know, he said. How do you know? I looked you up this morning, she breathed out. You looked me up? Yes. Before or after you texted me about Marcus calling your office? Before. She looked at the table, at the coffee cup, at her own hands wrapped around it. She thought about 3 years of case files and bar prep books and 60-hour weeks and the specific gutting silence of a man who had watched her build something and decided it wasn't worth staying for. She thought about Marcus's face last night when he saw who was sitting beside her, the reassignment of value in his eyes, the things she had noticed and been sickened by and was still thinking about at midnight and at 2 a.m., and when she woke at 5:30 with the alarm she'd been setting since law school. You can't fix what he did, she said. Whatever this is, whatever last night was, you can't make that not have happened. I know that, Dominic said. I'm not trying to fix it. Then what are you trying to do? He looked at her steadily. Right now, have coffee with a woman who's a hell of a lot more interesting than anyone else I've sat across from in a long time. Elena studied his face for the performance of it. Found nothing that looked like performance. Found instead the thing she had noticed in the corridor last night. The quality of someone telling the truth, not because it cost them nothing, but because they had decided the alternative cost more. She drank her coffee. He drank his. Outside, the city moved through its evening rhythms, indifferent and continuous. There's a problem, she said eventually. There are several, he said, the photograph. The one taken last night at the restaurant. She watched his face. By tomorrow morning, it won't just be 400 shares. People are going to start asking questions about who I am. My firm is going to notice. The partners are going to have opinions. Yes. And Marcus isn't done. Whatever he was doing calling your office this morning, he's not going to stop. She set down her cup. He doesn't stop when he feels like he's losing. Dominic's hands were still on the table. Neither do I, he said. The words landed quietly and sat there. Elena felt something shift in the room, not the air, not the light, but something in the arrangement of what was possible and what wasn't. The way the landscape of a situation changes when two people stop talking around the actual thing and put it on the table between them. She should have left then. She had the clear, precise instinct of a woman who had rebuilt herself from very specific rubble and knew exactly what further demolition looked like before it started. She should have stood up and thanked him for the coffee and gone home to her law books and her 60-hour weeks and the careful, protected life she had constructed on the far side of the worst thing that had ever happened to her. She did not leave. She said, My firm has a fundraising gala next Friday. Black tie, partners, clients, half the city's legal establishment. She kept her voice steady. Marcus and Cassandra will be there. Price Holdings donates to the foundation every year. Dominic said nothing. He waited. I've been planning to go alone, she said. I've been planning to go alone and stand in a room with him again and absorb whatever he does and go home and study for the bar. She looked at Dominic Hale directly, across the small table in the blurred chalk coffee shop, with the full clarity of a woman who understood exactly what she was doing and did it anyway. I'm not going to do that anymore. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Friday, Dominic said. 7 o'clock. He nodded once. And in the back of Elena's mind, in the careful paralegal architecture of her thinking, something she had not anticipated registered with cold and absolute precision. She had just made a decision that could not be walked back, in front of a man who collected things that could not be walked back. And somewhere across the city, Marcus Vale was making phone calls he also could not take back, and the space between all of them was closing faster than any of them had planned for, and when it closed, something was going to break. And she still didn't know if it would be Marcus or Dominic's careful composure, or the life she had spent 3 years building with her bare hands. She gathered her coat and stood, and Dominic stood with her, and she walked out of the coffee shop into the cold night air and did not look back. And behind her, the door closed on the last moment before everything that was going to happen next had already been set in motion. The week between the coffee shop and the gala moved the way time moves when you're waiting for something you can't name precisely. Too fast in the hours when you needed to think, and too slow in the hours when you needed not to. Elena worked. She always worked. That was the one constant she had built her entire adult life around, the one thing Marcus leaving had not been able to take from her, the one rhythm that held when everything else had gone arrhythmic and strange. She arrived at Hendricks & Cole at 7:45 each morning and left after dark, and in between, she processed case files and cross-referenced precedents and read bar prep materials on her lunch break with the focused, slightly desperate energy of a woman who understood that her law license was the only door that opened purely on her own effort and no one else's. But the week had a different texture than usual. On Tuesday morning, senior partner Richard Hendricks passed her desk and paused and said, with the carefully casual delivery of a man who had been considering his phrasing, "I understand you were at Cielo Friday evening." He didn't phrase it as a question. He didn't need to. Elena looked up from the Morrow file. "My cousin's engagement dinner," she said. Hendricks had the broad, weathered face of a man who had spent 40 years reading rooms for a living. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully categorize. Not hostile, not warm, somewhere in the complex register of a man trying to decide how much to say. "The photograph circulating online was," he said, "a few of our clients have asked." "What did you tell them?" "That I trusted your judgment," he said. "I'd like to continue to feel that way." He walked on. Elena watched him go and then turned back to the Morrow file and read the same sentence 4 times before it entered her brain. On Wednesday, Daniel Marsh dropped his phone on her desk again, this time without commentary, simply pointing at the screen. The photograph from Cielo had migrated to 2 additional social media platforms and a gossip aggregator that covered what it called city power movements. The caption on the aggregator read, "Sources suggest Dominic Hale's new companion has ties to Hendricks & Cole. Speculation about the firm's relationship with Hale family interests?" The post had a question mark, which was the aggregator's way of implying something without being responsible for implying it. Elena handed the phone back without speaking. On Thursday, she received a voicemail from a number she didn't recognize. The voice was a woman's, clipped and precise, identifying herself as Genevieve Price, Cassandra's older sister apparently, and the operational head of Price Holdings' Legal Affairs Division. The message said, "Ms. Whitmore, I think it would be mutually beneficial for us to speak before Friday evening. Please call me back at your earliest convenience." The tone of it was the tone of someone who believed that any conversation they initiated was, by definition, to their own benefit. Elena did not call back. She told Dominic about it Thursday evening. They had fallen into a pattern that she had not decided on consciously. Brief calls in the early evening, after she left the office, walking the 12 blocks home because the cold air helped her think. He listened without interrupting, which was something she was still adjusting to. The quality of his attention on the other end of the line. Not silence exactly, but a weight, a presence, the sense of someone absorbing information rather than waiting for their turn to speak. "Genevieve Price is the one who manages the family's legal exposure," he said when she finished. "If she's calling you, Marcus has talked to her. He's trying to route around me directly." "Route around you how?" "By reaching you first, before tomorrow night." A pause. "She wants to know what you want." Elena stopped walking. She was at the corner of Aldrich and Fifth, The intersection where the city smelled like roasted chestnuts from a vendor cart that materialized every October and disappeared in November. "What I want," she said. "Money, quiet, agreement to step back, whatever shape it takes, that's what she's offering. I'm not doing this for money." "I know that," he said. "She doesn't." Elena started walking again. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. What happens if I show up tomorrow night and she makes the offer in person? "You tell me what you want me to do," Dominic said, "and I do it." The simplicity of it was almost disarming. She had spent years working in a legal environment where every sentence was qualified, every promise was conditional, every commitment came wrapped in the fine print of its own exceptions. The directness of him, this man who ran an empire built on things she had spent her professional life prosecuting, was the most disorienting thing about him. "I want to go to the gala," she said. "I want to walk in and do my job and stand in a room with people who matter to my career and not be defined by any of this." "All right," he said. "That's it? All right?" "That's it," he said. "I'll be there at 7. She hung up and walked the remaining 6 blocks home, and spent the evening reviewing bar prep materials, and did not let herself think about what the gala might actually look like until she was lying in bed at midnight with the city making its slow, quiet sounds outside her window. And then she thought about it for 2 hours before she finally slept. Friday arrived with the specific indifference of a day that didn't know it was significant. She wore black, not because she was making a statement. She had 3 formal dresses, and the navy one was already associated with the night this began, which felt wrong in a way she didn't want to examine. And the third was emerald green in a way that was too deliberate, too much like a woman announcing herself. The black dress was fitted through the waist and understated and let her be visible without performing visibility, which was exactly what she needed. Dominic was outside at 7 o'clock exactly. He wore a black suit that matched nothing and outweighed everything else in its immediate vicinity through some quality that had nothing to do with the tailoring. He looked at her when she came through the building's lobby doors with an expression that moved through something too briefly for her to catch, and then settled back into composure. "You look good," he said. "Don't make it complicated," she said. "It was a simple statement." "Nothing about this is simple." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent. "No," he agreed. "It's not." The car took them to the Aldrich Grand, which was the kind of venue that existed specifically for events like this. A converted historic building with original stonework and enough square footage to hold 400 people in formal wear, while making each of them feel that the room had been designed for their particular comfort. Elena had been to 3 Hendricks and Cole galas. She knew the layout, the rhythm, the geography of who stood where and talked to whom and meant what by it. What she was not prepared for was the shift in the room's center of gravity when she walked in beside Dominic Hale. It was not immediate. It was gradual, the way a tide comes in. First the staff near the entrance, the particular attentiveness of people paid to notice who mattered, and then a ripple outward through the room as recognition moved from person to person in the silent, efficient language of social capital. Elena watched it happen in her peripheral vision while keeping her face composed and her shoulders back, and her gaze directed at the middle distance in the way she had learned to carry herself in rooms where she needed to be looked at without giving the impression that she was aware of being looked at. Hendricks found her within 4 minutes. He shook Dominic's hand with the calibrated warmth of a man who understood exactly who he was shaking hands with and had decided in the 48 hours since their hallway conversation where he wanted to position himself relative to that knowledge. "Dominic," he said, "it's been a while." "Richard," Dominic said, "good turnout." "Always is." Hendricks looked at Elena with the expression she now recognized as his version of approval. Restrained, technically deniable, but present. "Elena, you look well." "Thank you," she said. Hendricks moved on. Elena exhaled slowly through her nose. "You know my boss," she said to Dominic. "I know most people in this room," he said. Not boasting, filing. "That's either very useful or very complicated." "Historically both," he said. They moved through the room in the way of people who were comfortable with each other without performing comfort, a half step apart, close enough to register as together, separate enough to each occupy their own space. Elena spoke to colleagues, to clients she recognized from case files, to two of the junior partners who greeted her with the slightly recalibrated attention of people who were revising their estimation of her in real time and not quite hiding it. She accepted a glass of sparkling water and held it, and did not drink from it, and kept her peripheral attention on the room's shifting geography. She found Cassandra before Cassandra found her. Cassandra Price was standing near the east end of the bar, with her older sister Genevieve, who was taller and sharper featured and carried the particular expression of a woman who treated every room as a negotiation she intended to win. Genevieve was watching Elena across the room with an assessment so direct it barely bothered to disguise itself. Marcus was not with them. That was the first thing Elena noticed, and it produced in her a specific unease she couldn't immediately locate the source of. Marcus was always with Cassandra at events like this. His absence from her immediate vicinity meant he was somewhere in the room doing something she wasn't watching. She turned slightly and scanned the room and found him. He was near the back corridor that led to the event's secondary rooms, the smaller spaces used for private conversations, for donor meetings, for the kinds of exchanges that happen at events like this that were not part of the official program. He was speaking to a man Elena didn't recognize, mid-50s, compact, with the short-cropped hair and the particular economy of posture that she had seen in exactly one other context, the men who had stood near the entrance of Cielo and positioned themselves without instruction. One of Dominic's, or someone pretending to be. She watched Marcus for 30 seconds. Marcus was doing the thing she knew, the tilted head laugh, the hand on the arm, the performance of ease that he deployed when he was extracting something from someone and needed them not to notice the extraction. The other man was listening with an expression that gave away nothing. Elena turned to find Dominic already looking in the same direction. "Who is that?" she said quietly. "The man Marcus is talking to." Dominic's jaw set by a fraction. It was the smallest tell she had seen from him, and she understood immediately that it meant something. "His name is Carver," Dominic said. "He handles certain logistical arrangements for my family." "And he's talking to Marcus." "Yes." She looked at Dominic's profile. "Is that a problem?" Dominic said nothing for 3 seconds, which was its own answer. "Stay here," he said. "I'm not staying here." He looked at her. Not a command in his voice, something quieter and more serious than a command, the tone of a man who was saying "trust me" without using those words because he understood she wouldn't respond to them yet. "Give me 4 minutes," he said. She gave him 4 minutes. She stood at the edge of the room with her sparkling water and watched him move through the crowd with that same quality of water around stone, smooth, unannounced, inevitable. And she watched the man named Carver see Dominic approaching, and she watched, in the same moment, Marcus see Dominic approaching, and she watched Marcus's face do something she had not seen it do before. He was frightened. Not the social discomfort from Cielo, not the recalculating reassignment of value. This was something more fundamental, something physical, a fear that lived below the level of performance. He stepped back. He said something. Dominic reached Carver and put a hand on the man's shoulder and spoke 2 sentences, and Carver nodded once and walked away. And then Dominic turned to Marcus, and the two of them were alone at the back of the room, and Elena was 40 feet away and could not hear a word. What she could see, Marcus spoke first. Dominic listened. Marcus spoke again, with more animation, the hands moving in the way they moved when he was making a case for something. Dominic's expression did not change. He said something, short, maybe 5 words. Marcus's face went through 3 things quickly. Then Dominic walked away and Marcus stood there alone for a moment before straightening and going to find his fiancée. Dominic returned to Elena's side. "Tell me," she said. "Not here." "Dominic, not here." He said it without looking at her, his eyes still moving through the room with that relentless, quiet surveillance. "We'll leave in 20 minutes. I'll tell you in the car." She held the unread sparkling water and waited. And the 20 minutes passed in the strange, pressurized way of time that knows something is wrong but hasn't yet located the exact shape of it. And then Genevieve Price materialized at her left elbow with the efficiency of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Ms. Whitmore." Her voice was smooth, her smile the kind that didn't require warmth to function. "I'm so glad we have a moment. I did try to reach you." "I got your message," Elena said. "Then you know I'd like to have a conversation." Genevieve's eyes moved briefly to the space where Dominic had been standing and found it empty and came back. "A private conversation about the situation you've found yourself in." "I didn't find myself in anything," Elena said. "I went to my cousin's engagement dinner and made a very significant public connection." Genevieve tilted her head. "Look, I'll be direct with you because I think you'd prefer that. My family has substantial business interests that intersect with certain of Dominic Hale's holdings. My future brother-in-law has created a situation that's become complicated for those interests. I'm trying to manage that complication before it becomes something more serious." Her eyes were steady and clear and entirely without malice, which was its own kind of frightening. "I'd like to know what it would take for you to step back from this." "I'm not stepping back from anything," Elena said. "There's nothing to step back from." "Ms. Whitmore." The smoothness in Genevieve's voice developed the faintest edge, like a blade being turned to catch the light. "I've looked into your background, your career, your ambitions. Your bar exam results will be published in January. You're hoping to move from paralegal to attorney within this firm." A pause. "The partners at Hendricks & Cole value relationships with established families in this city. The Price family is one of those families. I'd hate for any of this situation, to create unnecessary friction in what should be a very promising career." The room continued around them, oblivious and glittering. Elena felt the thing land. Felt it land the way the Marcus comment had landed at Cielo, clean and specific and designed for maximum effect. And she made the same choice she had made that night. She did not flinch. "Are you threatening my career?" she said. "I'm describing a landscape," Genevieve said. "What you do with the description is your choice." Elena held her gaze for 3 full seconds. "Thank you for the conversation," she said. "Good night." She found Dominic at the coat check. He read her face and said nothing, and they left. In the car, the city moved past the windows in amber and dark, and Elena sat very straight with her coat in her lap and her hands flat on her thighs and said, "Genevieve Price just told me my career is at risk if I don't step away from you." Dominic's eyes were on the window. "I know." She turned to look at him. "You know." "I suspected she would move on you directly. It's what I would do." His jaw was set. "What she doesn't know is that the Price family's leases on 3 of my family's commercial properties are up for renewal in February. Her leverage over you is contingent on those renewals going through." His eyes moved to hers. "They won't, if I say otherwise." The cold clarity came again, the same clarity as the coffee shop, the same precise registration of what she was inside. "So you have leverage over her?" "Yes." "And Carver, the man Marcus was talking to. What was that?" Dominic's expression changed by a degree. That fractional tell. "Marcus made contact with Carver 3 days ago," he said. "He offered Carver money to provide him with certain information about my family's operations." Elena stared at him. "What kind of information?" "The kind that would be valuable to people interested in disrupting my family's business." He said it steadily, without anger, with the specific flatness of a man reporting a thing he has made peace with. The kind that a man might seek if he wanted to create enough instability in my position that I'd have reasons to distance myself from someone publicly associated with me. The car made a turn. Elena processed this. "He's trying to blow up your business," she said, "to get you to drop me." "That's the theory. By going through one of your own people." "Carver came to me this morning," Dominic said. "He told me about the contact. He turned down the money." "This morning," Elena said. "You knew this morning, and you let me walk in there tonight without telling me." The silence lasted 2 seconds. "I needed to see what Marcus would do when Carver didn't take the offer," Dominic said. "I needed to watch him make his next move in a room where I could see it. The cold clarity was not clarity anymore. It was something sharper." "You used me," she said. "Tonight. You needed me in that room so Marcus would feel confident enough to make the approach. Elena, answer the question. His jaw worked. It was more complicated than that. It's not complicated at all. Her voice was very steady, and she hated how steady it was because she could hear underneath the steadiness the things she was holding back, and she refused to let it surface. Not here, not in front of him. You knew this was going to happen tonight. You knew what Genevieve was going to say to me, and you knew what Marcus was attempting, and you brought me into a room full of the most important people in my professional life and used my presence as bait. I brought you to a room where I could protect you, he said. That's not what happened. Elena. Don't. The word came out harder than she intended. Good. She needed it to come out hard. She needed to hold this line precisely because her instinct, her terrible, unreliable instinct that had already proven catastrophically wrong once, was to hear the logic of what he was saying and find it reasonable, and she could not afford reasonable right now. I spent 3 years rebuilding something, a reputation, a career path, a set of relationships in that firm that I built 1 hour at a time. Genevieve Price just told me all of it is contingent on what I do next, and you knew she was going to say that, and you let me walk in there without warning. The car had slowed. They were outside her building. Dominic turned and looked at her fully for the first time since they'd gotten in the car. His face was doing something she hadn't seen before. Not the composure, not the composed vigilance, but something beneath both of those. Something that had the texture of a man confronting a consequence he had calculated intellectually and is now encountering physically for the first time. You're right, he said. I made a calculation about the evening, and I weighted my objectives over your preparation. That was wrong. She looked at him. Is that an apology? It's an acknowledgement, he said. I don't apologize easily. I'm working on it. She held his gaze for a long moment and then reached for the door handle. Wait, he said. She stopped, didn't turn. Marcus isn't going to stop, Dominic said. What he tried with Carver tonight, that wasn't the first attempt, and it won't be the last. And Genevieve has now shown her hand directly, which means they're no longer operating at the level of social maneuvering. They're applying real pressure. His voice was still flat, still even, but something ran beneath it now like current beneath ice. Whatever you decide about me, about this, I need you to understand that stepping back isn't going to make them stop. You're already in this. The photograph put you in it, and Marcus's choices have kept you in it, and the only variable now is whether you have someone beside you who knows how to operate in the terrain you're standing in. Elena had her hand on the door. The leather of the seat was cold through her coat. Outside, her building's lobby glowed amber and quiet. You're saying I need you, she said. I'm saying the people trying to destroy what you've built are not operating by rules your training prepared you for, he said. And I am. She sat with that for a moment that stretched. Then she said very quietly, what Genevieve said about the partners, about my career, is that a real threat or is she performing? It's real, he said. The Price family's relationship with Hendricks goes back 15 years. She can create friction. How much friction? Enough to delay your license application. Enough to stall a promotion for 2 years. Enough to make you feel it. She absorbed this. The sparkling water she'd never drunk was still in her hand from the gala. She'd somehow carried it out, and she set it on the seat beside her because she needed her hands free for this. I passed my bar exam, she said. Dominic said nothing. I took the results call in my car in the parking garage because I didn't want anyone in the office to see my face when I found out. She kept her eyes on the lobby through the windshield. I sat in that parking garage for 20 minutes before I could drive, because I knew what it meant. 3 years of 60-hour weeks and no vacations and dinners standing at the counter, and that one phone call was going to mean all of it had worked. She paused. I haven't told anyone yet, not even Marisol. I was going to tell the partners next week. The silence was very still. And now Genevieve Price is going to use that, Elena said. She's going to use the thing I've been working toward for 3 years as a pressure point to make me small again. Her voice didn't shake. She was very focused on the fact that her voice did not shake. Because Marcus can't stand that I moved on and built something without him. Dominic was watching her. She could feel the quality of it without turning. "Tell me what you want to do," he said. She finally turned and looked at him in the amber light of the car in the lobby in the October city, and what she felt was not the exhausted composure she had been carrying all evening, not the careful steadiness, not the performance of a woman in control. What she felt was the specific, cold, clarifying anger of someone who has been told for the last time that the thing she built belongs to someone else's leverage. "I want to fight back," she said. "On my terms. Not yours. Mine." Dominic held her gaze, and in his expression she saw the thing she hadn't been able to classify before. Not assessment, not calculation, not the management of an asset. It was closer to recognition. The particular expression of a man who had been operating alone in hostile terrain for a very long time and has suddenly encountered someone who understands the terrain not because they were trained for it, but because they were built for it by the specific pressures of their own survival. "All right," he said. She got out of the car. The cold air hit her, and she stood on the sidewalk and turned back to the window before it closed and said, "Monday morning, you're going to tell me everything you know about the Price family's lease arrangements, Marcus's finances, and whatever Carver found out about what Marcus was actually offering. Everything." "Monday morning," Dominic said. The window went up. The car pulled away. Elena stood on the sidewalk outside her building in her black dress and her coat in the cold night air and felt the full weight of where she was standing. No longer the woman absorbing the hit, no longer the woman rebuilding in silence, no longer the woman whose carefully constructed life was the target of other people's leverage. She was already calculating. That was when her phone rang. Not a number she recognized, not the pattern of the Price numbers or Marcus's number. A completely unknown caller, and she almost didn't answer it. And then she did because the week had already taught her that the calls she least expected were the ones that mattered most. The voice on the other end was a woman's, older, deliberate, with the particular cadence of someone choosing each word the way you choose footing on unstable ground. "Ms. Whitmore," the woman said. "My name is Catherine Hale. I'm Dominic's mother." A pause, so brief and so precisely weighted that Elena understood immediately it was not a hesitation but a choice. "I think it's time we spoke. There are things about my son's situation, and yours, that he hasn't told you. Things that change the nature of what you've agreed to." Another pause. "I'd like to meet before you make any more decisions. Because once you understand what you're actually standing in the middle of, you may feel very differently about the direction you've just chosen." The city held its breath around Elena. "What hasn't he told me?" she said. Catherine Hale said, "Everything that matters most." Catherine Hale said, "Everything that matters most." Elena stood on the sidewalk with the phone pressed against her ear and the cold working through her coat and said, very carefully, "How did you get this number?" "The same way my son got it," Catherine said. "We have the same resources. That should tell you something." "It tells me several things," Elena said. None of them particularly reassuring. A sound on the line that might have been something approaching appreciation. "Good. You're going to need that instinct." The older woman's voice had the particular texture of someone who had spent decades saying difficult things in calm registers. "I'm at the Meridian Hotel, room 1412. I'd like you to come tonight. It's almost 10 o'clock. "I know what time it is," Catherine said. "And I know you're standing outside your building deciding whether to go upstairs and try to sleep or come here and get the information you actually need to make the decisions ahead of you. I'm offering you the second option." Elena looked up at the amber light of her lobby. At the 7th floor, where her law books sat on the kitchen table and the bar prep materials were stacked with the careful organization of someone who had been building toward a specific future one page at a time. 40 minutes, she said. She got a cab. She did not call Dominic. The Meridian was on the north end of the city's financial district, the kind of hotel that had been there long enough to have outlasted 3 economic cycles and retained the specific, unshowy confidence of things that did not need to announce their quality. The lobby was nearly empty at this hour. Elena rode the elevator to the 14th floor, with her coat still buttoned and her mind running fast and quiet, the way it ran when she was reading a deposition transcript and something in the chronology didn't align. Catherine Hale opened the door before Elena knocked. She was 70, perhaps, or carried 70 the way certain women did, not with the weight of it, but with something that looked like the accumulation of a long argument that she had mostly won. She was fine-boned and straight-spined, with silver hair cut close and eyes that were the same unclassifiable winter watercolor as her son's, which Elena registered with the specific unwanted sensation of a thing confirmed. She wore dark trousers and a charcoal sweater, and she looked at Elena the way Dominic looked at things. Not appraising, not assessing, but absorbing, filing, deciding. "Come in," she said. The room was a suite, not ostentatious, just large, with a sitting area near the window where two chairs faced each other across a low table with a tea service that had been recently poured. Catherine moved to one chair with the economy of someone who had stopped performing comfort years ago. Elena sat in the other. "You didn't tell Dominic you were coming," Catherine said. "No." "Good." She poured tea into Elena's cup without asking. "That tells me you're thinking for yourself. That's what I needed to know first." Elena looked at the tea, didn't drink it. "What hasn't he told me?" Catherine set down the pot and folded her hands in her lap and looked at her directly. "What do you know about the Hale family's current situation?" "What's public? The real estate holdings, the commercial leases. The rest I can infer from 3 years of criminal defense work." "Then you know the shape of it." Catherine nodded once. "What you don't know is that the Federal Organized Crime Task Force has been building a case against the Hale family for 22 months. They're close. Dominic knows they're close. The family's legal team has been managing it, but 3 months ago something changed." Her eyes stayed on Elena's. "One of our primary legal shields, a set of lease arrangements and property transfers that provide legitimate cover for certain financial flows, is structured through a property management company that holds its principal assets in a trust that requires a co-signatory on any modifications. The original co-signatory died in June." Elena was very still. "The Price family's commercial leases," she said. Catherine's expression moved by a fraction. "You're quick." "The lease renewals in February," Elena said. "The ones Dominic said he controls." "He controls them contingently," Catherine said. "The full picture is more complicated. The trust modification needed to cleanly renew those leases and to restructure the underlying financial architecture before the task force gets close enough to see it clearly requires a co-signatory with specific standing. Dominic has been looking for the right arrangement for 4 months. She paused. 1 second. Clean. And then Marcus Vale publicly humiliated a woman in front of a room that included a Price Holdings director, and Dominic Hale sat down beside her. The room was very quiet. Elena could hear the city outside the window, 30 stories below, moving through its late-night rhythms without any awareness of what was being described in this suite. "He wasn't just reacting to what Marcus did," Elena said. Her voice came out flat. She needed it flat. "The woman at the table, me, being connected to Marcus, who's connected to Price, he saw the architecture." "I don't know exactly what he saw in that first moment," Catherine said. "I'll give him that much. I believe the impulse was genuine. Dominic has a code about certain things that I did not install and cannot take credit for." She looked at her hands briefly, "but by the next morning, when he knew who you were, yes, he saw the architecture." "He needs a co-signatory," Elena said. "Someone with legal standing, professional standing, someone whose credentials are clean, and whose association with the Hale family can be framed as personal rather than operational." She heard herself building it the way she built a case argument, statement by statement, and the building of it made her stomach drop steadily like an elevator with a cut cable. "If we were together, publicly, credibly, and I were licensed to practice law, you would have the standing he needs," Catherine said, "with appropriate structuring." The silence lasted 4 seconds. "He's using me," Elena said. "He's doing what the men in this family have always done," Catherine said. "They see a problem and they find a solution, and they do not always fully separate the solution from the person providing it." She looked at Elena steadily. "I came from outside this family. I married into it knowing what it was, and I spent 30 years watching the men in it conflate their affections with their strategies and cause enormous damage to the people they genuinely cared about." Her voice was even and without self-pity. "I am telling you this because you are not from this world and you have not had 30 years to learn how it works, and you deserve to make an informed decision before you are too far in to make it clearly." Elena stood up. She didn't mean to. Her body made the decision before her mind caught up, a physical response to the things settling into full shape, all of it at once. The photograph at Cielo, and the coffee shop, and the gala and Monday morning, and the whole architecture of the last 8 days assembling itself into a structure she could finally see from outside. She walked to the window. 14 floors down, the city was amber and indifferent and continuous. She pressed 2 fingers against the cold glass and breathed. "Does he know you're telling me this?" she said. "No." "Why are you telling me?" "Because I want to see what you do with it," Catherine said. "And because if my son is going to do something genuinely dangerous, which bringing you further into his world would be, I want the person beside him to be someone who walked in with their eyes open." A pause. Not someone he maneuvered into position. Elena stood at the window and felt the cold coming through the glass against her fingertips, and thought about Hendrix in the hallway, and Daniel's phone, and Genevieve Price's smile, and Carver standing in the back corridor, and the way Dominic had said not here in the gala, and the way he had said, "I made a calculation in the car." And she thought about the parking garage and the bar exam results, and the 20 minutes she had sat alone knowing that something she had built entirely herself had finally been confirmed. And then she thought about Catherine Hale sitting in this chair having this conversation at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, and she turned around. "There's a piece you haven't told me yet," Elena said. Catherine looked at her. "The federal case," Elena said. 22 months of building. They're close, you said. How close? Something in Catherine's expression shifted. Not surprise, but the specific quality of a woman recalibrating her assessment of someone. 60 days, she said. Perhaps 90. After that, the exposure window narrows significantly. And the trust restructuring must be complete before then, which means Dominic needs this resolved in 60 days. Elena walked back toward the chair but didn't sit. She stood behind it, hands on its back, and looked at Catherine directly. And Marcus, what Marcus tried to do with Carver, was that about me or was that about the trust? The silence was 1 second longer than the others had been. Both, Catherine said. Marcus had a relationship with Price Holdings' internal legal team before his engagement to Cassandra. Through that relationship, he became aware of the lease structure. Not the full depth of it, but enough to understand it had significance. When he saw Dominic attached publicly to you, he understood he had inadvertently created a connection that was more consequential than a romantic one. She folded her hands again. He's been trying to disrupt it because disrupting the Hale family's legal architecture disrupts the lease renewals, which disrupts the Price family's obligations, which Genevieve has been trying to exit for 2 years. Elena absorbed this. So Marcus is working with Genevieve, she said. They've been aligned since September, Catherine said, before the Cielo dinner. The engagement to Cassandra was as much a business arrangement as a personal one. Marcus provides Genevieve with information about the Hale family's structure. Genevieve helps Marcus position himself in Price Holdings' leadership. She paused. Your presence beside Dominic disrupted both their plans. You became a variable neither of them had accounted for. The room was very still. Elena stood behind the chair with her hands on its back and felt the full 3-dimensional shape of it. All of it. Every surface and angle, the way you feel the shape of a structure when you've finally found the load-bearing walls. She had walked into Cielo 8 days ago in a navy dress to eat dinner at her cousin's engagement party, and she was standing now in a hotel suite at 10 o'clock on a Friday, being told that she was standing in the middle of a federal investigation timeline, a family trust crisis, a corporate espionage arrangement, and the deliberate strategic maneuvering of a man she had been willing to consider trusting. She picked up the tea, drank it, set the cup down. I want to meet with Dominic, she said. Tonight. Here. I want you both in the same room, and I want the full picture on the table, and I want to ask my questions and get answers that aren't managed. She held Catherine's gaze. Can you make that happen? Catherine looked at her for a long moment with those winter water eyes that she now knew were a family feature, not a personal one. Yes, she said. I can. Dominic arrived 31 minutes later. He came through the shore with the quality he always had, the unhurried, inevitable quality of water finding its level. And then he saw his mother and he saw Elena, and something in his face closed down and reopened in the space of a breath. And Elena watched the process and noted exactly what it looked like. A man confronting a conversation he had known was coming and had not fully prepared for. He looked at his mother. "Catherine." "Sit down, Dominic," she said. He looked at Elena. Elena looked back at him and said nothing, and kept her face exactly as neutral as she needed it to be, which required more effort than she would have admitted. Because the thing she was feeling was not the clean, cold anger from the car. That had been simpler, cleaner, the anger of a betrayal she could name and put a boundary around. What she was feeling now was more complicated, more uncomfortable. The specific emotional confusion of a person who has been maneuvered by someone they were in the process of beginning to trust, which was different from being maneuvered by an enemy and considerably harder to process. He sat. "She told you," he said, to Elena. "Yes," Elena said, "all of it. The trust, the timeline, Marcus and Genevieve's arrangement, the federal case." She kept her voice even. 60 days. His jaw was set. He looked at his mother again, briefly, with an expression she couldn't fully read, and then he looked back at Elena and did something she had not seen him do before. He put his elbows on his knees and leaned forward and pressed his hands together and looked at the table between them. "I should have told you myself," he said. "Yes," Elena said. "I was managing the sequence of information." "I know." "That's not—" He stopped. His hands pressed together harder. "That's not the same as lying. It's the same as not trusting me," she said, "which is what you've been asking me to extend to you from the moment you sat down at that table." The silence was a long one. Catherine was very still in her chair, watching both of them with the expression of someone who has removed herself from a proceeding she set in motion. "Tell me what you actually need," Elena said. "Not the managed version. The real version." Dominic looked up. His face had a quality she hadn't seen in it before. Stripped of the composure, not raw exactly, but more exposed than she had seen it, the face underneath the operational surface. "The trust requires a co-signatory with legal standing," he said. "Someone whose professional credentials are clean and whose relationship with the family can be documented as personal. The restructuring can't happen without it. And without it, the task force has a viable angle in approximately 60 days. He didn't look away. "You being licensed would give you the standing. You being with me would give it the framing." "And if I say no," Elena said, "then I find another way," he said. "And you walk away from this and I make sure the Price family understands that any pressure on your career is a decision they don't want to make." "You'd protect my career even if I walk." "Yes. Why?" He looked at her steadily. "Because whatever else this is, what happened to you at Cielo happened in front of me, and I made a choice, and that choice has consequences for you that exist independent of anything else." His voice was even and direct, and carried none of the performance she had been watching for all week. "Protecting your career is something I owe you regardless of what you decide about the rest." Elena held his gaze. "I have 2 more questions," she said. He waited. "The Carver contact. Marcus trying to get information about your family's structure. How dangerous is that actually? Not to you. To me." Dominic's eyes didn't change. If Marcus successfully passed that information to the right people, it could accelerate the task force's timeline, which would create pressure on everyone associated with the Hale name in any documented capacity. A pause. "Including someone whose name recently appeared in photographs beside mine." Elena breathed. "So I'm already exposed." "You were exposed when the photograph was posted," he said. "That's been true since Saturday morning." "Second question," she said. "Your mother said you have a code about certain things, about what happened at Cielo. She said she didn't install it." She leaned forward slightly. "What is it actually? What made you sit down?" The room was very quiet. Dominic looked at her and the operational surface was still down, and what was underneath it was something she had been trying to see clearly since the first night, and was now seen without obstruction, not sentiment, not strategy, not the managed presentation of a man who wanted something from her. Something older and less comfortable than any of those things. Something that looked like it had been there for a long time and hadn't had anywhere to go. My mother was treated that way once, he said, in a room full of people who pretended not to notice. I was 17. I wasn't powerful enough to do anything about it. He held her gaze. I've been powerful enough for a long time now. I don't waste the opportunities when they come. The silence after that was different from the others. Elena sat with it for a moment and then stood up and buttoned her coat. Monday morning, she said. Your office. Full documentation, the trust structure, the timeline, the price lease arrangements, everything Marcus has done, and what Carver found out. I want to read everything. She picked up her bag. And I want your family's legal team in the room, because if I'm going to help you, I'm going to do it properly, with full information and documented agreement about what I'm doing and what I'm not. Not as a romantic arrangement that happens to be useful, as someone who has read the complete picture and made an informed decision. Dominic stood. His mother stayed seated, which Elena suspected was deliberate. And if after reading the complete picture you walk, Dominic said. Then I walk, Elena said, with what you promised about my career and with a full understanding of why. And you don't contact me again. He held her gaze. Agreed. One more thing. She stopped at the door and turned. Marcus. Whatever he's doing, the Carver contact, the information pipeline to Genevieve, it needs to stop before Monday. Not because of me. Because if he successfully passes anything useful to anyone with federal connections in the next 60 days, this whole structure collapses and none of the rest of the conversation matters. Dominic was already looking at her with the expression she now knew meant he was 3 steps ahead. It's being handled, he said. Tonight? Within the hour. She held his gaze for one more second and then she opened the door and walked out and did not look back. The elevator was empty. She stood in it with her coat buttoned and her hands at her sides and her jaw set and felt the full weight of the week pressing down on her from every direction. The gala, the parking garage, Cielo, the coffee shop, the cold clarity of Catherine Hale's voice on the phone saying everything that matters most. All of it compressing into the 43 seconds the elevator took to reach the lobby. She walked out into the night. Her phone buzzed. Dominic. A single line. Thank you for not walking tonight. She stood on the sidewalk outside the Meridian and looked at the message and typed back, I haven't decided anything yet. His response was immediate. I know, that's why it matters. She put the phone in her coat pocket and started walking, because the cold helped her think, and she had an enormous amount of thinking to do before Monday morning. And somewhere across the city, in a building she didn't know the address of, something was being handled within the hour, and Marcus Vale, who had once looked at her across a restaurant and reduced her to a label and a category and a life he'd already decided to outgrow, was about to discover that the woman he had dismissed had become the most consequential variable in a situation none of them had anticipated. She walked 6 blocks before she stopped. She pulled out her phone and called Marisol. It rang 3 times, and Marisol answered with the fuzzy, warm disorientation of someone dragged out of early sleep, and Elena said, without preamble, I need to tell you something about the bar exam. Marisol's voice sharpened immediately. Elena, I passed, Elena said. 3 weeks ago. I passed. The sound Marisol made on the other end of the line was the kind of sound that rooms full of people tried to suppress, pure and unmanaged and entirely without self-consciousness. And Elena stood on the sidewalk in the cold night air and let it wash over her and felt something she had not let herself feel since the parking garage. She had built this. All of it. Hers. And nobody. Not Marcus, not Genevieve Price, not the Hale family's 60-day timeline, not the federal task force building its case in a room she'd never seen. Nobody was going to take it apart. Marisol was still talking, laughing and crying simultaneously in the way of someone who had been waiting for good news long enough that receiving it felt like pressure releasing from a sealed container. And Elena listened and breathed the cold air and turned to look back at the Meridian Hotel rising above the city's amber skyline, 14 floors of light and consequence, and felt the decision she was going to make on Monday morning already forming in her chest like something that had been there for a while and was only now being named. She did not know yet whether she was walking into the right choice or the most expensive mistake of her life. She knew only this. She was walking in with her eyes open, her credentials earned, and her name on a law license that belonged entirely to her. And when she walked into Dominic Hale's office on Monday morning and sat down across from his legal team with 3 years of casework and 2 years of bar preparation behind her eyes, every person in that room was going to understand something that Marcus Vale had failed to understand at Cielo, and Genevieve Price had failed to understand at the gala, and perhaps even Dominic had not yet fully calculated. She was not a variable. She was not a co-signatory. She was not a woman who needed protecting. She was Elena Whitmore, attorney at law, and the Monday morning meeting was about to become something none of them had prepared for. Monday morning arrived without ceremony. Elena was up at 5:30, the same as every other morning, but she didn't open the bar prep materials. She sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and the complete documentation she had spent the weekend building. Not Dominic's documents, not the Hale family's files, but her own. 3 years of case notes from Hendricks and Cole cross-referenced against everything she had learned in 1412 at the Meridian, organized into a structure that was entirely her own thinking, her own architecture, built from the foundation of her own training rather than anyone else's strategy. She had spent Saturday reading everything Dominic had sent, the trust documents, the lease structure, the timeline of the federal investigation as his legal team understood it, the full picture of what Carver had found about Marcus's information pipeline to Genevieve Price. She had read it the way she read deposition transcripts, slowly, without conclusions until the full picture was assembled, going back to reread sections when something didn't align, making notes in the margins with the mechanical pencils she'd been using since her first year of law school because pens felt too permanent for working documents. Sunday she had built her own analysis. What she found in it was not what Dominic's legal team had found, because she was looking from a different angle, not the angle of a family trying to protect its existing structure, but the angle of a litigator looking for the pressure points in an opposing argument. She found 3 things the family's team had missed or underweighted, and she sat with them on Sunday evening until she was certain, and then she wrote them up in the clean, precise language of a legal memo and printed 2 copies and put them in the folder with the rest. At 6:45 she showered and dressed, and ate half a piece of toast because her stomach was doing something complicated and she needed something in it. She put on the charcoal blazer she wore when she needed to feel like the most prepared person in a room. She picked up the folder in her bag and left the apartment. The Hale family's primary offices were in a building on the south end of the financial district that looked from the outside like every other building in that part of the city, glass and steel, and the specific blankness of architecture that didn't need to announce itself. The lobby had a desk and 2 men who looked at her with the particular quality of people paid to notice everything and react to nothing. And one of them made a call, and within 2 minutes a woman came down and escorted her to the 18th floor without speaking. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows on one side and a table that could seat 12. Dominic was already there, standing near the windows with his back partly to the room, and beside him were 2 men she didn't know. Both in their 50s, both with the compact, careful quality of people who spent their professional lives inside very high-stakes rooms, and had learned to carry that without showing it, and a woman of perhaps 40 with close-cropped natural hair and the focused, unsentimental expression of someone whose attention cost something. The woman extended her hand first. "Paula Reyes," she said. "I've been the family's primary counsel for 6 years." "Elena Whitmore," Elena said. "I know." Paula's expression was neutral and entirely professional and conveyed in its neutrality a specific assessment that Elena registered and filed. "Dominic said you wanted the complete picture on the table before we proceeded." "That's right." Dominic had turned from the window. He looked at her with the composed attention she had come to recognize as his version of being fully present, and there was something in it this morning that was different from every other time she had been in a room with him. Something slightly less managed, as if the conversation in the Meridian suite had removed a layer of the operational surface and it hadn't fully reconstituted. "Elena," he said. "Let's sit down," she said. Not unfriendly, not warm either, level. They sat. Paula distributed files. The 2 other men, introduced as Garrett and Sohn, the family's financial and compliance specialists, opened laptops. Elena set her own folder on the table in front of her and did not open it yet. Paula walked through the structure efficiently and without unnecessary preamble, which Elena appreciated. The trust, the co-signatory requirement, the lease restructuring that needed to be complete before the federal task force's investigation reached the angle that would expose it. 60 days, as Catherine had said. 58 now. When Paula finished, Elena opened her folder. "I want to address 3 things your analysis doesn't account for," she said. Paula looked at her. "The first is the notification requirement in the trust instrument," Elena said. Section 14, subsection C. The co-signatory arrangement requires a 30-day notification period to all named beneficiaries before any structural modification can be executed. That's not in your timeline. She set the relevant page in front of Paula, which means your 58 days is actually 28 days, because you need the first 30 to run concurrent with the notification requirement. The room was quiet. Garrett looked at Sohn. Sohn looked at the document. "Second," Elena said, "the Price family's lease arrangement has a force majeure clause that Genevieve has been positioning to invoke. I found the correspondence. It's in the materials Dominic sent, page 47, buried in the appendices. She's been building a paper trail for 3 months that would allow Price Holdings to exit the lease arrangement without triggering the default provisions, which means your leverage over her renewal isn't as clean as Dominic described." She set that page beside the first. "If she invokes force majeure before the restructuring is complete, the financial architecture your team is relying on loses one of its 3 load-bearing columns." Paula picked up the page. "Read it." The expression on her face moved through something and then settled back into professional neutrality, but the something had been there. "Third," Elena said, "Marcus Vale's information pipeline to Genevieve hasn't been closed." Dominic's head came up slightly. "You told me Friday night it was being handled within the hour," Elena said. She looked at him steadily. "I spent Saturday going through the documentation you sent, the Carver contact, the financial offer Marcus made. That's the piece you were handling. But Marcus has a secondary channel." She opened to the last page of her notes. "He's been in direct communication with a former associate of the Hale family named Preston Wills for at least 6 weeks. Wills left the family's employment in August, under circumstances your file describes as a mutual separation. The communication pattern in the phone records your legal team pulled doesn't read as a mutual separation. It reads as a departure that produced a grievance." She looked at Dominic. "Marcus found him. Marcus is offering him something, and Wills is in a position to provide the task force with context that Carver wasn't." The room held a silence that had weight to it. Dominic's jaw was set. He looked at Paula. "We didn't identify the Wills connection," Paula said. It cost her to say it. She said it anyway. "No," Elena said, "because you were focused on Carver as the primary exposure. Carver is the one who came to you. That's what made him visible. Wills didn't come to you because Wills doesn't want to be managed. He wants to be avenged." She kept her voice even and without theater. "You have a different problem than the one you've been solving for." The silence went on for 5 more seconds, and then Dominic said, "What's your proposed solution?" Elena looked at him across the table. She had been waiting for this moment since Sunday evening, had been sitting with it and turning it over and examining it from every angle. And now that it was here, she felt not the anxiety she'd expected, but a specific ground-level steadiness. The same quality she'd felt in the parking garage when the results call came through. The sense of standing on something she had built herself and knowing it would hold. "The notification period runs regardless of when you file it," she said. "Start it today. 28 days remaining after that, not 58. Tighter, but workable, if the Price situation is resolved before Genevieve invokes force majeure." She looked at Paula. "The force majeure clause requires a qualifying event and a 30-day notice period of its own. She's been building the paper trail, but she hasn't filed. I know that because if she'd filed, your team would have it. She's holding it as a threat." She looked back at Dominic. "Which means she still wants the negotiation. She just wants it on her terms. She wouldn't be holding the threat if she'd already decided to pull the trigger." "You think she can be negotiated with," Paula said. "I think she's a businesswoman who has been given a bad option by Marcus and a worse option by the current trajectory, and a clear third option might be more attractive to her than either of the others." Elena set her pen down. The Hale family offers Price Holdings the lease renewal at favorable terms in exchange for Genevieve severing her arrangement with Marcus and issuing a documented withdrawal of the career interference she threatened at the gala. She met Paula's eyes. In writing. Documented. Not a gentleman's agreement. Paula looked at Dominic. Dominic said, "And wills." "That's your problem to solve," Elena said. "I'm a lawyer, not an enforcer. But I'd suggest that whatever grievance Wills left the family with in August is fixable if someone who matters decides to fix it. And a fixed grievance is harder for Marcus to purchase than an active one. What Wills wants is probably not what Marcus is offering him. People who leave on bad terms usually want acknowledgement more than money." Dominic was looking at her with the expression she now associated with his version of being surprised. The stillness, the slight recalibration behind the composed surface. "You came in here to advise us," he said. "I came in here to do what I said I would do," Elena said. "Read the complete picture and make an informed decision." She picked up her pen and closed her folder. "I've read it. Here's my decision." She looked at him directly. "I will serve as co-signatory to the trust modification. Voluntarily, with full knowledge of what I'm signing, with documented legal counsel of my own choosing, reviewing the instrument before I execute anything." She paused. "That's non-negotiable. My own counsel. Not Paula, whose client is the Hale family." "Agreed," Dominic said without hesitation. "The arrangement is documented as what it is, a professional engagement, with appropriate compensation, between a licensed attorney and a family trust requiring legal services. It is not a romantic arrangement that happens to be useful. It is a professional one that exists independently of anything personal." She held his gaze. "If those two things develop a relationship over time, that relationship is separate and stands or falls on its own merits. It is not the basis for this agreement." The room was very still. Paula was looking at Elena with an expression that had moved past professional assessment into something more direct. Garrett had stopped typing. Sohn was studying the table. Dominic said, "Understood." "Last thing," Elena said. "Marcus." Something moved across Dominic's face. "Whatever you're doing about Marcus, about the Wills connection, about what he's been building with Genevieve, I want it handled without anything that would expose the family to additional legal liability, and I want documentation that it was handled that way. Because if I'm signing my name to anything connected to this family, I need to know the methods stay on the right side of the line I'm professionally obligated to maintain." She kept her voice level. "I'm not naive about what the Hale family is. I was a criminal defense paralegal for 3 years. I've read enough case files to know the shape of how things get done. I'm asking you to keep the Marcus situation inside the lines, not for his sake, for mine." Dominic looked at her for a long moment. "Within the lines," he said. "Your word on it." "My word," he said. It landed the way his words tended to land, without embellishment, without the performance of sincerity, just the flat absolute quality of a man for whom a given word was a given word, and the consequences of breaking it were internal rather than external. She believed him. She didn't know entirely what to do with the fact that she believed him, so she set it aside and focused on what came next. What came next was 28 days that moved faster than any month she had lived through since the first year after Marcus left. The notification period ran. Paula filed the documents. Elena's chosen counsel, a senior attorney named Bridget Howe, from a firm entirely unconnected to either the Hale family or Hendricks and Cole, reviewed the trust instrument across 4 days and 3 revisions, and delivered her assessment with the precision of someone who had been given a genuinely complex piece of work and respected it. The structure was defensible. The co-signatory provision was standard, Elena's liability was bounded and documented, and the terms were, in Bridget's words, fair, which is not what I expected going in. Genevieve Price accepted the third option on day 11. Elena wasn't in the room for that negotiation. She didn't need to be. Paula delivered the terms, Genevieve's attorney reviewed them, and on the morning of day 12, Elena received a brief email from a Price Holdings legal address containing a single attached document, a written withdrawal of the career interference threat, documented and signed, exactly as Elena had specified. She read it twice, printed it, filed it. Then she walked to Richard Hendrick's office and knocked on the open door and told him she had passed the bar exam 3 weeks ago and was formally requesting to be considered for a junior associate position. Hendricks looked at her from behind his desk for a moment with the expression of a man assembling information he had been collecting for some time. "Sit down, Elena," he said. She sat. "I'm aware," he said, "that the last 2 weeks have been somewhat complicated." "Yes," she said. "The price situation." He chose his words with the care he always chose them. "I received a communication from Genevieve Price this morning. She expressed that any concerns her family had regarding Hendricks and Cole's personnel were resolved." "Good," Elena said. Hendricks looked at her. "The Hale family has been a peripheral presence in several of our cases over the years," he said. "Peripheral and careful, which is how they've remained peripheral. I don't ask questions I don't want the answers to." He folded his hands. "What I do ask is whether the people who work in this firm are conducting themselves in a manner consistent with our professional obligations." "I am," Elena said. "I have documentation." He held her gaze for a long moment. "I've watched you build your career here for 3 years," he said. "You've done it without asking for anything you hadn't earned." He opened the drawer of his desk and took out a single sheet of paper and set it on the desk between them. "This is the junior associate offer. It was prepared 2 weeks ago, actually, before any of this became complicated. I was waiting for you to tell me about the exam results." Elena looked at the paper. "I'm sorry I waited so long to tell you," she said. "You were ready when you were ready," he said. "Take the document, read it, have someone review it. Tell me by Friday." She picked it up and stood and said, "Thank you, Richard." He nodded once, which from Hendricks was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Preston Wills was a harder resolution. She didn't know the details. She was not supposed to know the details, and she had been explicit about that. What she knew was that on day 17, Dominic called her at 7 in the evening while she was reviewing the trust instrument with Bridget for the 4th time, and he said, "The Wills situation is closed." And when she asked him what that meant within the lines, he said that Wills had been offered a formal acknowledgement of the circumstances of his departure and a settlement of a financial dispute that had apparently been the actual root of the grievance all along, and that Marcus Vale was no longer in possession of anything useful. "And Marcus himself," Elena said. "Marcus," Dominic said, "has discovered that the Price family's enthusiasm for their arrangement with him has significantly cooled. Genevieve informed him last week that his role in the family's business plans was being reconsidered." A pause. "I understand Cassandra's mother has also had a conversation with her daughter about the wisdom of the engagement." Elena absorbed this. "You didn't threaten him." "I didn't need to," Dominic said. "I removed the things he was standing on. People like Marcus don't need to be threatened. They need to be left without an audience." She sat with that for a moment. "Is that within the lines?" "Entirely," he said. She believed him about that too. The trust modification was executed on day 26, 2 days inside the deadline. Bridget was present. Paula was present. Garrett and Sohn were present with their laptops and their careful, compressed energy. Dominic was present. Elena signed her name with the mechanical pencil she'd been using since law school, and then she crossed out the pencil and borrowed a pen because Bridget told her it needed to be ink, and she signed again, and the instrument was dated and witnessed, and the process that had begun with a man putting his hand on the back of her chair in a restaurant on the 43rd floor was completed in a conference room on the 18th floor with the quiet efficiency of a legal document being properly executed. When it was done, Paula shook her hand. Garrett nodded. Sohn said, "Good work," which she understood was high praise from someone who said very little. Dominic waited until the room had cleared. Then he looked at her across the empty conference table and said, "You came in here 10 days ago and identified 3 things my team missed." "Your team was looking at the wrong problem," she said. "That happens." "It doesn't usually happen to Paula." "Paula is excellent," Elena said. "She was working with the information she had." He looked at her steadily. "You could have used what you found to negotiate a better position for yourself, better compensation, more leverage in how the arrangement was structured." "I know," Elena said. "Why didn't you?" She looked at him across the table. Because I didn't come in here to accumulate leverage. I came in here to solve the problem correctly. She picked up her folder. The difference between those two things is the reason I can look at myself in the mirror, which is something I've prioritized over a lot of other things for a long time. He was quiet for a moment. I owe you an apology, he said. A real one, not an acknowledgement. Yes, she said, you do. I managed you, he said, from the beginning, not entirely. I meant what I said at Cielo, and I meant what I said at the coffee shop, and I meant what I said in my mother's hotel room. But I managed the sequence, and I weighted my objectives, and I put you in a room at a gala without telling you what you were walking into. He held her gaze. That was wrong. Not wrong in a way that was a strategy failure. Wrong in a way that was a failure of character. I was treating you as a variable in a situation, and you were never a variable. You were a person. I'm sorry. Elena looked at him for a long time. She had spent 10 days doing the hardest, most important work of her professional life. She had spent those same 10 days rebuilding her understanding of what had happened and who this man was. Not from a position of hope, but from a position of evidence, the only position she trusted. The evidence said he had made a calculation. The evidence also said that when the calculation was exposed, he had not defended it, had not reframed it, had not managed it. He had called it what it was. That was not nothing. You should know, she said, that I'm going to be a very difficult person to be with, if that's what this is. I know, he said. I mean that practically. I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to want documentation, and I'm going to need things to be on the right side of the line, always, because my license is the only thing in my life I've built on pure ground, and I will not compromise it for anything or anyone. She held his gaze. Including someone I might be beginning to care about. Something in his face moved. Not the operational surface, not the composure, but the thing underneath that she had seen twice and only twice. In Catherine's hotel room, when the management came down, and now. It was the expression of a man who had been operating alone in hostile terrain for so long that being seen clearly had the quality of a physical sensation. I've been surrounded my whole life by people who wanted something from me, he said. Power, protection, money, association. People who saw the name and did the calculation and positioned themselves accordingly. His voice was even, but it had the weight of something that had been carried for a long time. You came into my office and told me what I'd done wrong and asked me to fix it and refused to use the information as leverage and signed the document because it was the right solution to the problem. He paused. I don't know what to do with that. I'm working on learning. Good, she said. So am I. She gathered her folder in her bag and stood, and he stood with her, and they walked out of the conference room together into the corridor where the day was doing its ordinary things. The hum of the building, the distant sound of the city through the glass, the particular quality of afternoon light in November that was already thinking about winter. In the elevator, he said, Dinner tonight. Not a question, she said. No, he said, it's not. It's not, but I'm asking. She looked at the elevator doors. The coffee shop, she said. The one with the blurred chalk menu. 7 o'clock, he said. 6:30, she said. I have things to do at 7. The corner of his mouth moved. 6:30, he agreed. The weeks that followed had a different texture than the weeks before them. November moved into December with the particular momentum of a city that didn't slow down for weather. Elena joined Hendricks and Cole as a junior associate on the 1st of December, which was a Monday, and she arrived at 7:45 as she always had, except that her name was now on a different door, and the cases on her desk were hers to argue rather than support. And she sat behind that desk on the first morning and felt something she had not let herself feel in 3 years. Something quiet and without performance. A satisfaction that had no audience because it didn't need one. She called Marisol at lunch. Marisol arrived at the office with flowers, which Elena accepted, and put in the window because they made the room look like someone lived in it. They ate sandwiches at Elena's new desk, and Marisol asked 3 questions about Dominic Hale that Elena answered honestly, which took longer than the questions seemed to require. And when she was done, Marisol looked at her with the expression she had been wearing since they were children, the one that meant she had been worried and was now cautiously unworried and was not yet ready to commit to fully unworried. He's complicated, Marisol said. Very, Elena agreed. Are you... Marisol looked for the word. Okay. Elena thought about this seriously, the way she thought about things she wanted to get right. I'm the most okay I've been in 3 years, she said. That's not because of him. Most of it I did myself. She picked up her sandwich. He's just part of the landscape now. And the landscape is better than it was. Marisol nodded slowly. He sat down, she said. At the restaurant. He just sat down. He sat down, Elena said. That was either the best thing or the most dangerous thing. It was both, Elena said. That's been the consistent theme. Marisol laughed, which was the sound Elena had been hearing her whole life and never once gotten tired of. And they ate their sandwiches in the office with the flowers in the window and the city moving outside the glass. And it was ordinary and good. Marcus Vale and Cassandra Price ended their engagement in December, announced in the brief, bloodless language of a social media post that said they had decided to part as friends and wished each other well. Elena read it on her phone on the subway home one evening and felt a clean, uncomplicated nothing. Not triumph, not grief, not the complicated residue of a wound that had healed badly. Just nothing, the specific absence of feeling that meant something had finished. She closed the app and went back to reading the brief she was working on. The federal investigation into the Hale family reached a staging point in January, and, finding the financial architecture it had been targeting restructured beyond the angle of attack it had been building toward, pivoted to a different line of inquiry that did not involve the trust or the lease arrangements or anything Elena had signed her name to. She learned this from Dominic, who told her simply, without theater, over coffee on a Sunday morning at the blurred chalk place that had become something adjacent to a regular arrangement. She asked him how he felt about it. He considered the question the way he considered all of them, fully, without rushing. Like someone who's been holding something very heavy for a long time and has set it down, he said, and is still figuring out what to do with the hands. She looked at him over her coffee. I know that feeling, she said. I know you do, he said. She passed her bar review period without incident. Her license was officially entered into the state registry on a Tuesday in February, and she learned about it from an email that arrived at 6:47 in the morning while she was still in her kitchen with her coffee, and she read it standing up at the counter and felt the thing she had felt in the parking garage, the same thing, the same quality of a structure bearing weight and holding. Except this time she didn't sit alone with it for 20 minutes. She called Dominic. He answered on the second ring. It's official, she said. A pause. Congratulations, counselor, he said. She laughed. It surprised her. The laugh, the ease of it, the way it came without calculation. She had been so careful for so long about what she let out, and when the uncalculated laugh felt like something she had almost forgotten was possible. I'm buying dinner tonight, she said. Don't argue. I wasn't going to, he said. That's a first. Don't push it, he said, and she could hear in his voice the same thing she could feel in her chest, the particular warmth of two people who had earned the ease between them through difficulty, who understood each other not because they were alike, but because they had each seen what the other was made of under pressure and had not looked away. She dressed for work that morning with the specific, grounded energy of someone who knew exactly where they were standing and had laid every stone of the floor themselves. The blazer, the files, the mechanical pencil in her bag next to the good pens, the 7th floor of a building without character that was more fully hers now than it had ever been. Not because anything had changed about the rooms, but because she was different inside them, because 3 years of construction had produced something that held. She stood at the window for a moment before she left, looking at the city in the February light, which was the gray-silver light of something deciding whether to become something else. She thought about Cielo, the 43rd floor, a man she had loved reducing her to a label in front of a room full of people who pretended not to notice, a stranger's hand on the back of her chair. She thought about what it had cost to get here. Not just the 3 years before Cielo, but the weeks after it, the conference room, the 28 days, the things she had signed her name to with full knowledge of what they meant, the conversations in cars and hotel suites and coffee shops with blurred chalk menus, The apology she had waited for and received and decided to accept, not because she had to, but because she had determined it was warranted. Everything that had happened had cost something. That was the nature of it. There was no version of the story where she arrived here for free, but she was here. That evening, at a restaurant she chose and booked herself. Not Cielo, not anywhere with a 43rd floor or a maitre d' who calibrated his smile to the guest list. Elena Whitmore sat across from Dominic Hale and ordered what she wanted and paid the bill when it came and did not look around the room to see who was watching. Nobody was watching. They were just two people at a table, eating dinner, talking about ordinary things. Her first case argument scheduled for March. His mother's opinion of a property they were considering. The blurred chalk menu at the coffee shop that had finally been updated. The conversation moved the way conversations move when two people are genuinely comfortable with the silence between the words. Which is to say, it moved without effort, without performance, without anyone managing the sequence. At the end of the evening, on the sidewalk outside the restaurant in the February cold, Dominic looked at her with those winter water eyes and said, "Ask me something you haven't asked yet." She looked at him, thought about it genuinely. "Are you happy?" she said. He considered it. "Closer than I've ever been," he said. "That's honest." "I told you," he said. "I'm working on it." She looked at him for a moment longer, this complicated man standing on a sidewalk in the February cold, this man who had sat down beside her in a restaurant when nobody else in the room had moved, who had miscalculated and admitted it and corrected it and kept correcting it with the particular effortful consistency of someone who was not naturally inclined to correction and was doing it anyway. She was not going to call it love tonight. That word was patient, and she had learned to be patient with the things that mattered. But she took his hand on the sidewalk, which she had not done before, and they walked in the direction of the coffee shop because the evening was not finished yet, and the city moved around them in its indifferent, continuous way. And the February cold was the kind of cold that required two people to be warmer than one, and Elena Whitmore, attorney at law, walked through it with her head up and her shoulders back, and the particular quality of a woman who had been tested by the full weight of what the world could put on a person and had found, when the weight came down, that she was stronger than anyone, including herself, had previously calculated. The coffee shop was warm and nearly empty. They took the corner table, same as always. The chalk menu on the wall had been updated, just as Dominic had said, the letters sharp and fresh and newly legible, and Elena sat across from the man who had sat down beside her when no one else would and ordered black coffee without looking at the menu because some things, once you knew them, you didn't need to read again. She wrapped both hands around the cup and let the warmth come through. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, two people who had each come from the far side of something difficult sat together in the quiet of an ordinary evening. And the story, which had begun with a hand on the back of a chair and a lie told to a stranger that turned out to be the most honest thing either of them had said in years, settled into the unremarkable, sustaining rhythm of something that had decided to become real.